BioCentury This Week is brought to you by the Biotechnology Industry Organization. Bio, we're doing big things. Your trusted source for biotechnology information and analysis. BioCentury This Week.
Looking at the pipeline of what's in the clinic now, what excites you? I'm not talking about particular drugs, but what areas, what kinds of cancer, where do you think the progress is going to be made?
Well, one of the things that I've noticed is once we have some glimmer of activity or a drug approved, for example, in a particular area where we have not had activity, there tends to be a lot of motion in the industry. And we saw that, for example, in renal cell carcinoma in the last 6 or 7 years, where we didn't have any drug development or very little drug development, and then kind of 6 or 7 drugs being developed during a very short period of time. I think we're going to see that same level of activity, for example, in the area of melanoma, and we're seeing that because we have an understanding, again, of the basic or some of the basic foundations of that disease from a biological point of view. We're going to see a lot more interest in lung cancer and looking at different types of lung cancer, again, perhaps even on a more personalized medicine approach, on an individual approach, looking at pathways of the disease and developing drugs around it.
What did you mean by woefully inadequate, and what would be your, what's your purpose in commissioning the report and in your strategic planning in general?
Well, the purpose was to gather ideas from all over the country, from bio CEOs, from patient organizations, from investors, and what we said to them is give us every idea you can think of that would transform the whole system so that we can get cures to patients more quickly. It's as simple as that. And I said, don't hesitate because an idea might be too complicated or too politically difficult or too out of the box. Let's just get all of the best ideas on the table that we can to create a vision of what would be the perfect environment to take advantage of the might of this country and its scientific capability, its leadership in the world to create these new and innovative cures.
You've been in the industry for 20 plus years, and you were at H&Q in the salad days of biotech when in the 80s and 90s when a lot of companies went public. I mean, that had to be a pretty fun experience.
It was a great experience. The conference continues to grow, even though our firms, Robertson and Montgomery and Alex Brown and H&Q have all been acquired. The conference continues to flourish, and even outside the conference, there's more going on outside the conference than there is inside the conference.
Absolutely,
these days.
Lots of stuff going on. But in terms of the deal flow, I mean, there were a lot of companies that were getting funded, and there had to be some pretty exciting times as you were a banker taking some of those companies public.
Yeah, when we were all working together back then, we would do 3-4 IPOs a night sometimes, and one after another. So it was very great times, bringing a lot of companies public, and we're seeing a lot of them mature today.
Yeah, and that would be a nice problem to have in today's market. I think we're talking more about like 3 or 4 IPOs a quarter.
Well, there used to be these windows where the window would be open, and you had the window of 1999, 2000, when really a whole entire class of companies went out. We had a similar thing in 2004, but today we really don't see the window as much, and it's more companies being opportunistic that are accessing the capital markets.
Yeah, and we'll also want to talk about the M&A market at some point as sort of an alternative to the IPO. But before we get into that, I want to bring it up with Mike. You've been covering companies for 20 plus years, also at H&Q as well in the late 80s. It's a much different ecosystem today than it was 20 years ago. I think we had 200 public biotech companies.
Right.
How did you go about covering companies in that environment, which was also a pre-internet environment?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to have grown up with the biotech sector. I mean, I started out as a rookie salesman back at Kidder Peabody, making cold calls to people at Amgen and not knowing the difference between a diagnostic and a therapeutic. So I, as I say, I grew up in an era where there were maybe a dozen companies that mattered. And so as the industry expanded, I was luckily able to keep up with most of the stuff, not everything. But I'd say that the difference between then and now Was back then, the buyers were not as sophisticated.
You're watching BioCentury This Week.